G'day, and welcome to another one of my videos. Today we're going to have a look at finding the circumference of a circle. Well, circumference is just a fancy name when we're working with circles for the perimeter. So we're finding the perimeter of a circle, but the word that we use for that is circumference. So you need to get used to that terminology if you haven't already learnt it. So how do we find the circumference of a circle? Well, what I'm going to show you first is a relationship that builds between the diameter of a circle and the circumference, and that helps us come up with the rules that we've got. So, circumference and diameter. So the diameter of a circle, well, that's the distance all the way across a circle through the middle of it here. So most of the time you'll see a horizontal line like that, but again, I could actually rotate that around and our diameter go through this way. So if we actually measure the circumference of a circle as accurately as we can, and then measure the diameter also, there's some interesting things that happen when we compare them. So if we take the circumference and divide it by the diameter, the more accurate we get, we'll get an answer approximately 3.14. Well, in fact, if we're even more accurate, we'll get an answer that is 3.14159266535. And it actually goes on forever. It's an irrational number. So this number is stored in your calculator, so you don't need to remember that. So each time we're working with this value, there is a button on your calculator. And it looks like this. Okay, it's our pi symbol. So it's just stored in our calculator for this irrational number. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to rearrange this formula, this relationship here, so that we actually have the rule for the circumference of a circle. So I'm using C for circumference and D for diameter if you haven't already picked that up. So what I want to do is I want to get C by itself. So I'm going to multiply both sides by D to eliminate this divide by D on this left-hand side. And when I do so, I get this rule, circumference equals pi times D. So to find the circumference of any circle, I take this value of pi, 3.1415, and then I multiply it by the diameter. And that will give us the circumference of a circle. Okay, so how do we find the circumference of a circle if we are given the radius instead of the diameter? So remember, the radius is a straight line that goes from the center of the circle to the circumference of the circle. So we call that the radius. And if you'll notice that if we actually put in 2 radii, and that's just the plural for radius, we don't say radiuses. So if we put in 2 radii together, then that will actually make a diameter of the circle. So 2 radii is the same as the diameter. And so if this is the formula for the circumference of our circle, as we just found a moment ago, and I'm going to replace that diameter with the 2 radii. So let's replace that, and we get pi times 2r. Now normally with our algebra, we don't write it like that. We usually have numbers first. So let's rearrange that using our algebraic techniques, and we find that the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r. So I'll change my diagram so that it suits. And so here we go. We've got a radius of a circle with some value r. And if I want to find the circumference of that circle, then 2 lots of pi times r. And that will tell us the circumference of a circle. Now, I prefer this formula than trying to remember that previous one, pi times diameter, because that way, when we're finding area of a circle, we're using the radius as well, and they look pretty closely the same thing. So you've just got to be a little bit careful. So we don't get them mixed up, I teach my students a little rhyme to help them remember what the actual circumference is. So you might remember this one. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. So my students, I get them to repeat it over and over and over again. and it doesn't matter whether they are in year 7 or in year 12, and they tend to remember that, which is really good. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. So there we go, that helps us with our formula. So I think it's time for a couple of examples. So let's look at our first example. Let's find the circumference of the circle below. And because we've got that pi value, that 3.141592655, and it actually keeps going, we actually want to round off our answer correct to 1 decimal place. So remember, once we think we've finished the question, read it and it will tell us if we need to round it off at all. So let's look at the diagram. We're given the radius is 4 centimeters. So we're finding circumference. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. So let's write down our rule now. So we just remembered it. And once we've written our rule, then we substitute in what we know. So we know the radius is 4 centimeters. So let's put that in. Now, when I do my substitution, I like to put in any of the signs that are missing from our expression. So I put my 2 times pi times 4, and that's what we'll press on our calculator. So we'll do that. And when we do so, we get this long number here, 25.13274123, and that continues on forever. But if we look back up the question, we haven't finished. We want to round that off to 1 decimal place. So you should know how to round these off by now. And so we want one number after the decimal point, which looks like our 1. Our next digit is a 3, which is a small digit, so that doesn't affect the 1. So it's actually closer to a 1. So our circumference is approximately 25.1 centimeters. So let's have a look at another example. You'll notice the difference in this example that we've actually got the diameter. So we'll look at that in just a second. But we're finding the circumference. So hang on, what's that? How do I remember the circumference of a circle? Well, twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. Okay, so that's in my head. And so let's write down our rule now. Circumference equals 2 pi r. But again, we've got the radius that we need, but we're given the diameter. So we need to remember that our radius is half the diameter. So 2 of the radii together makes the diameter. So the radius is the same as half the diameter. So let's halve this 5.3. And we're going to substitute that into our formula there. So the radius is 2.65. And let's substitute that in. 2 times pi times 2.65. Remembering I like to put in our time signs in there. Makes it easier when we're substituting in or putting our numbers into the calculator. And we ended up getting this very long decimal here, 16.65, etc. Reread the question. It does say that it wants to round off to 2 decimal places. So after the decimal point, I want 2 decimal places. So the 6 and the 5. The next digit is a small digit, so it doesn't affect the 5. So our circumference is approximately 16.65 centimeters. So let's have a look at a third example. This one I thought I'd challenge you a little bit. This time I'm actually telling you what the circumference is, and that's 52.8 meters. So this time the question, I actually want you to find what the value of the radius is here. And we're going to round it off a little bit different this time to significant figures. Now if you haven't done 2 significant figures before, I'll do a quick explanation as we go through this. So circumference. So let's put in what we know. So we know that the circumference on our diagram is 52.8, and we're trying to find this radius. So circumference, twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. So let's write our formula down. Circumference equals 2 pi r. Now, substituting what we know. Well, this time we know that the circumference here is actually 52.8. So let's put that in. And I'm putting my time signs in there just to make it a little bit easier. So I'm trying to find out what r is. So the opposite of timesing by 2 pi is dividing, so let's divide both sides by 2 pi. They eliminate from the right hand side, and on the left hand side we've just got 52.8 divided by 2 pi. So remember, one way of division is a fraction. And if we do that on our calculator, that will tell us what the radius is. So use your fraction template on your calculator, makes it easier. Otherwise, you might, if you just press divided by, you need to make sure you do 2 times pi in brackets because you're dividing by all of that. And when we do that, again, we get a very long decimal, r equals 8.4033, etc. And this time we want to round off to 2 significant figures, not 2 decimal places. So, significant figures, we start from the beginning and find the first digit that's not 0, which is the 8. So that's our first significant figure. Then our next significant figure is the 4. So we've got our 2 significant figures. Check the next digit. It's a 0, it's a small digit, so that doesn't affect the 4 there. So our radius stays as approximately 8.4 meters. So a more challenging question there where you had to work backwards a little bit. If you find that a little bit difficult, let's just stick with finding the circumference of circles, and maybe with a bit more confidence later on you can come back and do these type of questions. But what you now need to do is to practice, and then practice some more, and practice again. And the more that you do that, you'll find it will become a lot easier and easier to remember. So remember, twinkle, twinkle, little star, circumference equals 2 pi r. So I hope you found this video useful, and just get out there and have a go at your work.